Genesis 1:27 says that, "So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female he created them." This verse has many implications for how we read the rest of the Bible, and depending on what we believe about the Bible and its truthfulness, it has many implications for how we live life and understand reality. This verse is one of the basis for people who see differences between the account of creation in Genesis 1 and the story of Adam and Eve in Genesis 2, viewing them as two separate accounts. And from a critical standpoint, this seems to be evidence of separate sources being combined to create the Bible. The documentary hypothesis, or JDEP, it's also used to separate the idea of Adam and Eve as a covenant creation, a special couple that were created in a covenant with God, versus all other humans coming from a different source outside of the Garden of Eden. And this is seen by some as a helpful workaround between the idea that humans are special creations established through Adam and Eve, and yet we are also descendants of common ancestors with apes, which proponents of evolution and Darwinism want to reconcile those differences. But those ideas are all very modern, and when we look back at historical sources, commentaries, the early church fathers, and most theologians for thousands of years, the clearest understanding of the verse is that it's the distinction between the him of Adam, created in the image of God. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them, is not irreconcilable because it is expressing the hidden nature of Eve within Adam, who emerged from Adam's rib. And that story is obviously fantastical. I don't know why we decide this or that particular element of a miraculous story is too implausible to be believed. Either we should reject it wholesale or accept it to the best of our ability, rather than picking apart the details. But interestingly enough, the idea that God could create human beings in his image and create a man, Adam, and then from Adam, a man and a woman, is biologically plausible. The chief difference between men and women, at least up until very modern times, was understood, well, originally it was understood to be in our physical natures and in the apparent physical differences between men and women. But as we've learned about biology and chromosomes, the sex chromosomes determine the sex of a child. And the difference between men and women is that a man has an X and a Y chromosome, and a woman has an X and an X chromosome, two X chromosomes. But while a woman inherits two X chromosomes from each of her parents, women are not actually designed to need two X chromosomes. And through a process called X chromosome inactivation, very early in a woman's, the development of a female baby, the cells will inactivate one or the other of those X chromosomes. The female cells are actually designed to function with one X chromosome, and the other one that is not needed is sequestered away and it basically ignored. And in a sense, it's almost as if the woman was designed to only have one X chromosome, and the presence of two is viewed by the developing cells as sort of an intrusion. So, from a biological standpoint, when God creates Eve out of the rib of Adam, the genetic information is present to create a woman because only one X chromosome is actually needed. Now, in reality, every other woman besides Eve is born with a mother and a father and inherits an X chromosome from each. And so, in each cell, they will either express the chromosome from the father or the chromosome from the mother. But within each cell, only one X chromosome is needed. So the necessity to create a woman from a man is possible. If you were cloning creatures, you could do that. You could use male DNA to create female. But it only works that way. And to those who, before we understood genetics, that would be counterintuitive because every person, male and female, is born from a woman. So the idea that women could emerge from men is counterintuitive. Now, there are mythological parallels to this idea, such as Zeus giving birth to the Titans out of his thigh. And I think that both the reality of the Adam and Eve story and the many parallels of male gods giving birth or having lesser gods emerge from their bodies, I believe that this was a concept that people were familiar with, and one of the reasons why there was a proclivity to experimenting with homosexual behavior. Oftentimes we talk about in ancient cultures that the purpose of that was purely either for pleasure or as a means of humiliating the victim. But at some point, there may have been a belief in a reproductive capability. And even in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, we most often look at it and the modern interpretation is that the sin was that the men wanted to sleep with men and had rejected sleeping with women. And that was their great sin. But the men in question are the angelic visitors who come to rescue Lot. And those are the men that the men of Sodom are desiring to sleep with. And so, while at that point in history they probably had realized that human men do not give birth, they could have, and it's likely that they did, have some idea that reproducing with a male God or an angel or a son of God, a divine being, could produce viable offspring, and that this might be a means of acquiring powerful Nephilim giants, which that aspect of mythology not only is biblical, but it pervades almost every other culture. And it was the desire to go back to that circumstance, the circumstance for which God ultimately decided to eliminate civilization in the flood, that really fueled a lot of the material conquests of the ancient world. The great pyramids and ziggurats that were built all over were all, like in the Tower of Babel story, a means of attracting divine or angelic creatures. That was their goal. That was the purpose for which they were doing it. When it says that they were trying to build a tower to heaven, they were trying to recapture this mythology about divine offspring between humans and angels, or humans and demons, or humans and gods, or sons of gods. And so I think that is one aspect of the story that can be explained very logically based on the mythology and the beliefs that they had. And the idea that this would just come out of nothing doesn't make sense, because it's so counterintuitive. And unless if they had believed in a true story of life emerging from males at some point, it seems foolish that they would continue to attempt such a thing without any results. But some of the other theological implications of this are, Adam learned that it was not good for him to be alone. And God brought all of the animals to him and showed him that they were not suitable helpers. Now, obviously, God knows this. And it says in the beginning of Genesis that God knew that it was not good that Adam was alone. At the beginning of Genesis 2, it says, in Genesis 2:18, the Lord God said, "It is not good that the man should be alone. I will make him a helper fit for him." So God knows he's going to make a helper fit for him. But then he brings all the animals, not to see if any of the animals could truly be a helpful partner, but so that Adam understands that these animals are not suitable helpers. And then God puts Adam to sleep, takes the rib, creates Adam, closes up the wound with flesh. So Adam emerges from his sleep and finds the woman, and this is very good. This is the companion that he's supposed to have. But he also has a scar, and God, who he's in communion with, tells him that this is the way that it happens. And so he's sending a message that things don't just emerge from nothing. They come out of sacrifice. And Adam, who had the sacrifice of aloneness and understanding that being alone was not good, and then the sacrifice that he gives up the rib, out of that sacrifice emerges something. And what comes forth in the woman is much greater than the sacrifice that Adam gives in the loss of his rib. But he's learning a principle. And prior to the events in Genesis 3, I think we can see that this principle is already at place. And that's found in the fact that the animals are allowed to eat the vegetation, the green vegetation. It says, to every beast of the earth, every bird of the heavens, and to everything that creeps on the earth, I have given every green plant for food. But for the man, he says, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food. So everything that a human was supposed to eat was a vegetarian food, but it was always something which had seed present in it. And as Jesus said much later on, that unless a seed falls to the earth and dies, it remains a seed. But if it dies, then it can bring forth new life. And so this concept of sacrifice was present from the beginning. Now, if man had been able to stay in obedient communion with God, this lesson could have been learned much less painfully, because the sacrifice of a seed is so minuscule in proportion to what it brings forth. One tiny seed that is only a portion of the fruit can bring forth an entire tree that produces more fruit. So in an economic point of view, it's a fantastic trade-off. What is lost is so much less than what is gained. And so that concept that everything good comes out of some sacrifice, small or great, I think is reflected in the fact of, we use that verse that in the image of God he created him, male and female he created them, and the female aspect was hidden within Adam. And part of God's image does contain female and feminine aspects, but much as in Adam, the image of God is the image of a male within which is hidden a female. And of course, within the female is hidden the reproductive capability to create new life. And so humanity is nested in that way. And that is a reflection of the character of God. So while we don't say that there is a specific person of God that is a female, there is a female, feminine characteristic hidden within God. And so even in Jesus, because he is male and he has both the X and the Y, the potential of all life is within him. And like Adam, whose side was opened up and the rib was taken out, and from that came the woman, when Christ's side is opened up on his death on the cross, blood and water come out. And in that blood is all of the information for life. And in its divine nature, we have to think, in a sense, what emerges from the body of God. And ultimately, everything. And the lamb slain before the foundations of the earth, that being slain is, in a sense, the vehicle through which everything comes to be. And as PVK and John Vervaeke, talk about, there is an agent and an arena distinction. The agent of God, God number 2, is the agent, the person, the one who's acting and doing. And the other, God number 1, is the arena. And the arena is always the feminine. It's that which brings things forth. And so that the idea is, in a sense, that out of God's body emerges all creation, the arena which brings forth everything else. So in that sense, when we look at things, from a genetic standpoint, we have a body, but within that body are all these cells, and yet within each cell is the DNA to create the whole body. The information is there. So a cell is like a seed, and that is what, this lesson of the seeds being there. So I don't think that there's any contradiction at all between these two passages and these two verses. That God created Adam in his image, and male and female, he created them. The only thing that separates those is time, and that is our perspective. That's our perspective on time. Because, as it says, the Lamb was slain before the foundations of the world. And yet, I don't think that God would cause Christ to suffer twice. So in some way, the events of the cross happened before the creation of the world. And that's a paradox, but I think that it's perhaps the only way that we can really make sense of everything.